Everybody, welcome back to what is kind of a strange video for me. I did a video just maybe a few weeks ago, I can't remember exactly when it was, that I was forced to, well, I wasn't forced to take down, but with everything that was going on with copyright and YouTube, as far as my channel, I decided to take it down, but I thought it was a really important video and one I was very proud of, and I had some really good response from that video, and I had people asking, like, where did the video go? So I wanted to redo that video, well, sort of redo it. Take the parts of that video that I was really happy with and insert it into this video, and then take the part that, was problematic, we'll call it, with copyright, using examples of other people's songs. I'm going to use some of my own musical examples to replace those portions of the previous video. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and I really wanted to get this video back so everybody could see it again as quickly as possible. I hope you guys do enjoy it. So let's do this. Let's just go and take a listen to the first part of that video now. I'm going to insert it here. This was some really important stuff I thought needed to be said, kind of about what makes a guitar tone great. I will be back soon after you watch that, and then we'll go into Cubase and take a look at some musical examples. Thanks so much for watching, guys. How many of you have heard of the phrase "in a vacuum"? Well, if we type it into a Google search bar, this is what comes up. Isolated from the context normal to it, and in which it can be best understood or assessed. That's kind of interesting, and you might be wondering why I'm starting a video off talking about, it's kind of a phrase and its definition or meaning. Well, I thought this was very pertinent to talking about what makes a great tone. I have a whole series about the Line 6 Helix creating a great tone. And that's kind of a funny thing to say, because I think there's probably some parameters that most people would, lump what they consider a great tone into, but everybody's going to have a different opinion about that, and who is right and who is wrong. If somebody came to me and played me a tone and said, is this a great guitar tone, or is this a good guitar tone? Don't know if I could answer that, because I don't have enough information. And you might say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, let's go back to the definition, right? Isolated from the context normal to it. So what does that mean? The context that a tone is going to be used in is an extremely important, if not necessary, piece of information to be able to decide whether a tone is good or great, right? So if we isolate it from that context normal to it, now you might say, well, what's normal to a tone? Well, it's going to be different for every situation. That's what makes this complicated, right? I could be in the recording studio recording a song, and it's a very particular mix. Maybe it's a very dense mix. Maybe there's drums, bass, horn section, synth pads, strings, piano, other guitar parts. Well, what's going to be normal for that context is going to be very different than what's normal in the context of sitting in your room playing guitar by yourself, having it come out of your monitoring system, whether it be a real guitar amp, an FR speaker, your studio monitors, or headphones. Those are all different contexts. Even something simple as an FR monitor to a pair of headphones, it's a different context. So this definition is very important. Isolated from the context normal to it. So if we dial in a sound on a set of headphones, well, that's the context that is normal to it, right? Now, if we isolate it from that context, we're going to get something different. This tone doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has to have a context attached to it, if that makes sense. And we carry on, it says, and in which it can be best understood or assessed. So let's go back to my example of a dense mix. If we have this big, fat guitar tone that sounds amazing when we're playing in our room, and then we try to put it in that dense mix, it very likely might just get lost. Maybe it doesn't have the presence to cut through. Maybe its bottom end sound is overshadowing other components from the mix and therefore making the mix worse. There's all sorts of ways we can look at how that could not be the right thing for that particular context. So far, this doesn't sound very helpful, but I'm not here to necessarily say, here is how we can tell if a tone is great or good. But more, we have to keep our ears and options and opinions maybe open to learning new things about tone, and maybe accept tones that we otherwise wouldn't have for very particular contexts. And I hope that kind of makes sense. What I mean by that is a lot of times we can sit down with a tone and we play it for 10, 15 seconds, and we all want to form opinions like this instantly, right? And we do. I don't think we can help it. We all have this sort of confirmation bias that, this is the tone that I have sort of floating around in my head. And as soon as I try something that works counter to that, we automatically dismiss it and write it off as, no, that's not the tone I wanted, that's not right. Instead of sitting back and going, let's listen, really listen. Get outside of your head and not be so, trapped into what we expect it to be. But let's actually listen to what it is and try to think of what the good points of that are. For instance, if we hear a tone and it's got maybe a lot of bite or edge to it, and we tend to like darker tones, what if we play that for a while and really sort of, climatize our ears to hearing that tone and start thinking, maybe that's what I need for it to work in a mix. Maybe that's going to allow me to put it in a mix, whether live or in the studio, and not have the volume so loud. And I talked about some of these things in a video I did of my top guitar tone tips, So this is more about going into listening to each and every tone we play through with an open mind and giving it a chance. Like I said, letting our ears acclimatize to the sound and looking for the positives in that tone rather than automatically discarding it as something that we can't use. So I think that's a very important point. So rather than saying, here is what constitutes a great tone, maybe we have to adjust that and say, this is potentially a great tone in a specific context, not in a vacuum, but in a specific context. And we have to adjust our thinking to allow ourselves to maybe use that tone in a particular context. And this is why I think it's so important to have a library of different tones at our disposal and not paint ourselves into this place where we feel like, no, this is the only tone that I ever like to play through, or this is my tone. I think because I've done a fair amount of studio work over the last couple decades or more, I've really opened myself up to this to realize that, there are a lot of what I would consider great tones. Some of them I would have never even thought about dialing in because I would have instantly maybe taken my bias and said, no, listen how horrible that sounds. But then you hear it in the context of a mix and you go, oh, wow, that really worked. And I think we can learn a lot about that. And we're going to go over to Cubase in a minute. And I'm going to give you some really interesting, I hope are interesting examples of this type of a thing, right? So I think a lot of it is in adjusting our thinking to maybe realize that there is greatness in some tones that we otherwise maybe would have discounted or discarded. And if we think of the different contexts we could put them in, don't judge them in a vacuum. Let's attach it to a context and say, this tone isn't something I would play in my room through my FRFR, but it is something I may be able to use in a mix. And with all the videos I've done and recreating tones of specific artists or just trying to get a tone to sit in a mix of a song we all know and love, say classic songs, it's a real eye-opener when you go in and realize that maybe this tone you created in a vacuum sitting in front of your studio monitors or through an FRFR or with headphones that you thought sounded amazing, as soon as you put it in the mix you go, wait, this isn't working. This doesn't sound anything like the original or what I'm used to hearing. It's not even close because I created it in essence in a vacuum away from the specific context. So I think now you see why I sort of led with that definition and keeping it. We can't judge a great tone in a vacuum. We have to have some context. Now that context, like I said before, could simply be us sitting in the room playing through our FRFR monitor or something we dial in through headphones. And that's fine if that's the only context you're going to use it in. But keep in mind fully that that's a great tone in that context, and when we switch over to maybe recording or playing live, the context has now changed. Therefore, what constitutes a great tone in that particular situation may have also changed. All right, so that was the first part of that video. Now, from there, I went into Cubase in the original video, and I used 4 examples of actual isolated guitar tones. I used Steve Lukather's rhythm tones and solo tones on Rosanna by Toto. I used Aerosmith's Sweet Emotion. I think I used Lynyrd Skynyrd's That Smell. I I should have checked on this fourth. There was a fourth one, but they were all examples of tones that I thought sounded very different out of the mix than in the mix. And I had located kind of the original guitar tones for that. So what I did here is instead, I've been working hard to replace a lot of my demos, whether it be for just some of the tones I create for my Dialing In series or for my Marketplace presets. And I decided to use one of my tones that was kind of in the ballpark and was designed to be as such, in the same ballpark as Rosanna, Steve Lukather's tone on Rosanna by Toto. And I'm not saying this is an exact copy or anything, but it's kind of inspired by. And this is from my classic 80s #1 preset from the Line 6 Marketplace. And I'll have the link to that below if anybody's interested in the preset. But that's not what this is about. This is more just about using a similar example to what I used in the first video. So let's go over to Cubase and take a look. So what I actually did, which was really a lot of fun, and what I've been doing is taking whatever song I used for the original demo, I'm trying to write my own kind of inspired by piece so that there's no issue with copyright, but I think people still sort of know what I was going after. So for the original playthrough of this, for this preset, I actually did a full playthrough using this to recreate all of Lukather's parts over the original tracks of Rosanna. That also is down, unfortunately, so this is in its place. So let's just go through, and I want to use this to demonstrate sort of that idea that, you know, the tone living in a vacuum, you know, we might hear a tone and go, yeah, that's not really something I want to hear or something I feel comfortable playing through. But yet when we hear it in a mix, it actually works quite nicely. So here is what I did. Let me take you through this first. To create this section, here I have my Cubase project file, all my guitars and backing track up here. My mixer down here, this is the final mix on it. What you can see here are the faders. The inserts I have on the rhythm section, drums, bass, and keyboards. I have some post-processing done, but as you'll see here on all of the guitars, there's no inserts or sends of any type. This is exactly as the preset sounds coming out of the Helix. I never touch these in the mix and do any sort of processing after the fact on them, but I do definitely for the drums and everything else. So because it was Rosanna, I went up to Superior Drummer, and let me see if this pops up on the screen here, and if I can get it to go. And I'll give Superior Drummer a little plug here, Toontrack a little plug here. I'm using the Rock Foundry expansion pack, which I love so much. And believe it or not, I had some grooves here that, listen to what these sound like. These are basically the same drum grooves as in Rosanna. So I kind of borrowed those, tweaked them a little bit, put them in different orders, and I ended up with, let me see here, this. And let me just go and solo Superior Drummer. This is the drum track I ended up with. And so on, okay? So that was my drum track, and then I created a bass track using, I'll give another little plug here, another favorite plugin of mine, which is a virtual instrument called IK Multimedia's Moto Bass. Oh, that's better, unsolo that. Does a nice job, you can select different basses and whatnot, but I created this bass line. Okay, you get the idea there. And then I also added in one more thing from Toontrack using their retro pianette library for easy keys. And I just put some like nice chord pads down on the piano, and that sounded like this. There's gonna be a real nasty sounding chord in here that I put in on purpose because it, you know, by itself, again, this is a good example of not living in a vacuum versus living in a vacuum. I think you'll hear the chord I'm talking about here. It sounds really awful by itself, like real dissonant, but once you put the bass guitar in and once you put the guitars in, it actually sits nicely. So that's what this sounds like. You hear that awful chord? It works though once you kind of get the whole rhythm section in together. A little bit better now, but then the guitars come in, it's even better. So that's what I was working with as far as a rhythm section goes. And I was happy with that. I think you can kind of tell it has the vibe of Rosanna, but I thought I'll use the rhythm guitar. So this preset has a clean guitar, which has a bit of edge to it. It has an overdriven guitar, and it has a lead guitar. And I really tried to get these in the ballpark, listening to the individual solo tracks that Lukather had on the original Toto song, Rosanna. And I found it worked really nice. So first off, let's listen to the whole mix together. So we hear what all the guitars sound like in this mix. And then you'll hear the mix as a whole and how it all kind of works. And then I'll isolate those guitars so you can hear what they sound like in a vacuum, kind of, right? Like what we were talking about. So here we go. Here's the whole mix. I'll play it front to end, and I hope you enjoy this. All right, so that's it. So I think you can sort of see how where some of my ideas were influenced by in that. But the solo was just that improvisation I did over the backing track of the chords and whatnot. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guitar parts in there. Let me explain. I have the clean guitar, which I play twice, and I pan it hard left and right, as you can see here. Clean guitar panned left, clean guitar panned right. I have the overdriven guitar left and right as well. So played twice, I performed it twice, and I panned them out left and right. This is so somebody can actually just listen to one side and hear just the one guitar. I'll give you an alternate way that I could have done the mix too. Then I have a single lead guitar that plays that solo, and the odd little time you see right here, right here, and right here, there's a harmony guitar that comes in and plays with it. So this is using the clean snapshot of the classic 80s #1 preset. Snapshot 2, which is the overdriven guitar, and Snapshot 3, which is the lead. All the delays, reverbs, and everything, chorus is all from the Helix, okay? So no other processing done here. So let's now listen for the clean guitar. And this is a subtle, subtle little part I put in the mix. But it's not so clean. I actually, kind of like Lukather's original tone, tried to put a little bit of an edge on it. And I actually might have put even a little more of an edge than his had, just because I liked it. It worked. You know, I use those as inspiration and influence rather than trying to copy, right? So here's what this clean guitar part sounds like. Okay, so what'd you think? Pretty edgy, and there's qualities about that sound that I think if I was creating it in a so-called vacuum that I don't really like. You know, there's an edginess to it, and if you're thinking clean chorused sound, that might not be what you want, but I noticed Lukather's original sound had a bit of an edge and a bite to it like that. It's fairly compressed, you know. So in the mix, though, it worked really well. And let me just play you a bit of that with just the one guitar playing it without the double on it. So a little bit of a breakup on it. So there's that. Now if we listen to that along with the rhythm section in the mix, let's listen to what that sounds like. Now, if you notice, I have it very low in the mix. That is what that part was designed to do. I wanted it to be very subtle and just a nice little texture in the background. And the fact that that has that bite and that edge to it and that tone is allowing me to pull it back in the mix and still have it be sort of present there, okay? So let's move on from that now, and let's go to the overdriven guitar. And this is the one that I found really surprising, even in the original Rosanna, is that the guitar was very spitty sounding on the end and edgy and kind of broken up in a bit of a nasty way, but it worked so beautifully, and when mixed in context with the rest of the mix, actually works really, really nicely. Here's the guitar tone, again, panned left and right. I'll play you, actually let's just play one here. I'll just bring that straight up the center and we'll listen to this one guitar. Do you hear how the tail ends on it get really kind of in a nasty crunchiness to it? And again, if that was a tone that a lot of people were just creating in a vacuum, it's the type of tone where I think you might shy away from it. And if you listen to it once without giving it a chance, going, ooh, I don't know if I like that. But that's another tool in our toolbox, having a tone like that, because in a nice dense mix, that may just sit beautifully. And I'll show you how it sits in this mix and how different it sounds once you kind of get it to the appropriate volume within the mix. And it just works. And again, because of that crunchiness and that kind of end nastiness that it has, you can kind of blend that into the mix at a bit of a lower volume. It still gives power and presence without sitting on top of the mix, if that makes sense. So let's do this. I'll pan that back left and we'll listen to both of those guitars in the stereo version. Okay, let's listen to that with the rhythm section and the clean guitars now, okay? That's gonna sound like this. Little side note, you don't even notice that nasty keyboard chord anymore. It just kind of blends in and gives a nice something to the sound, right? So what do you think? That's starting to come together. Now we're still focused on those two guitars a little too much because our lead instrument isn't there. Or, you know, it could be a vocal or whatever else. But now we're gonna bring in the lead guitar. And let me just play you the lead guitar by itself right here. What do you guys think? I use the same tone actually to add a harmony, which would be this right here. So again, maybe not a tone, if we dialed in right away, we would go, oh yeah, that's great. It might be in somebody's taste and not so much in somebody else's, but what a compliment it gives to the other tones that I've already dialed in. We have this kind of nasty, overdriven guitar, a little edge of breakup, clean, really compressed, and then this kind of very smooth, but with some crunchiness on top. I don't know if you noticed that in this lead sound. But the highs are not all pulled out, just like in Lukather's original tone. That's in the mix, that sounds like such a smooth tone, but there's actually some upper end artifacts they didn't try to get rid of. So listen again just for the upper end stuff in it. I wanted some of that pick attack to still cut through, right? So now let's listen again just to the overdriven guitar. So 3 pretty complementary tones. So let's listen, now that you have those in your head, let's listen to the whole mix again. And that's the sound we get out of blending all those together. Now, some people might say, oh, why do you double the guitars like that? Well, I just like to give it that stereo width. But you know, another alternative to this would be, say, getting rid of one of the clean guitars and let's say one of the overdriven guitars, and then just panning them slightly in and having the clean on one side and the distorted guitar on the other side. That would sound like this. So these are now just one instance of each guitar. I think it still sounds just as good, and it's just a different mix, and it's a personal preference at that point. I kind of tend to enjoy just the stereo spread of having these guitars as such. So I don't know if any of you guys find that surprising at all. And I really like the examples I gave with the classic songs in the first video, but unfortunately I can't use those. So I thought this might be the next best thing, to kind of just explore the sounds of tones in the mix versus out of the mix. And it's some food for thought to keep in mind, that we have to have some sort of context for a tone to make sense, you know? Is this a good tone? Yes, no, and maybe, all in the same, you know, all of those are correct answers as far as I'm concerned. I need to understand the context that it's going to be used in to understand whether it's a good tone, right? That edgy, overdriven rhythm tone is not something I want for everything. I want a toolbox full of great tones, different style tones, and then I can pick and choose it for the appropriate situation. So this idea of what makes a great tone, what's the answer to that question? Well, there almost isn't an answer to that question, right? It really has to always be accompanied with, what's the context? We don't want to have that tone living in a vacuum where we have no context for it. to understand if it's going to work. There's some really nasty, awful guitar tones on their own that are just beautiful and gorgeous in a mix and do the job they need to do for a particular situation, if that makes sense. So I guess my point is we don't want to be so quick to just write a tone off. You know, so many people will listen to something and go, oh, that's too muddy. Oh, that's too harsh. Oh, that's too boomy. Oh, that, you know, and insert the descriptive term here. And, you know, a lot of times instead of doing that, why don't we play with it for a bit? Let our ears kind of acclimatize to the sound and start thinking less about, I don't like this tone, but where can I use this tone? What can I use this tone for? And then collect a collection of tones in our toolbox, understanding how we can use those tools and where they might be useful, and even getting ourselves used to playing through tones we are otherwise uncomfortable with. That's another thing. A lot of people just have an idea in their head, like I believe I mentioned before, that, you know, my tone sounds like this, or this is a tone I like, but let's force ourselves to get comfortable with tones maybe we wouldn't have used before. And that's another approach to it. So I hope you guys enjoyed that sort of revisit to that, and I hope you don't mind me using my music like that to kind of illustrate the point, and I hope you enjoyed the tones, and I hope you enjoyed the piece of music. I do have this video up now as I released today, which is just a demo for this particular preset. So if you want to watch me perform that, you can watch me play it and see what I played on it. So again, I thought this was an important video to revisit and put back up. I thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please like it and share it with as many people as you can, because I think it's an important topic and a good way to start thinking about our presets and tone. Whether we use, you know, a Helix or a Fractal or a Kemper or a Real Amp or whatever, it's all kind of a similar thing. We want to think of these things. And it helps us to adjust our thinking maybe to accept the wider range of tones and open up our, you know, tonal possibilities and tonal toolbox that we have to work with. And hopefully our live playing and our productions will improve for it. So thank you guys so much again. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and hit the little bell notification so that you get notified when I do new videos. And I'll be back soon with some more content. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your time. Ciao for now.